There's something haunting about empty profiles. You know the ones I'm talking about. The accounts with a handful of followers, maybe one photo from 3 years ago, a bio that says nothing. They're there, but not really. Watching, but never participating. You see them in your viewer list, in your group chats, scrolling through your stories. But when you visit their page, it's like staring into a void. And here's what keeps me up at night. These aren't antisocial hermits or digital Luddites. These are your coworkers, your childhood friends, maybe even your siblings. They use technology. They consume content. They're deeply aware of what everyone else is doing. They just refuse to add their voice to the chorus. And if you've ever wondered what drives someone to live as a digital ghost, to exist in the margins of the very platforms designed to make us visible, what I'm about to tell you will change how you see silence forever. Because this isn't about shyness. It's not even about privacy. It's about something far more profound. The conscious decision to preserve your humanity in a world that's systematically dismantling it, one post at a time. Let's start with what most people get wrong. When someone doesn't post on social media, the first assumption is usually judgment. Oh, they think they're too good for it. Or pity. They must be really insecure. Sometimes it's confusion. What are they hiding? But here's the reality that psychologists are only beginning to understand. People who abstain from posting aren't rejecting connection. They're protecting something infinitely more fragile, their sense of self in a world that profits from its dissolution. Think about what happens neurologically when you post something online. The moment you hit share, your brain enters a state of anticipatory reward. You're waiting for validation, likes, comments, shares, and each notification triggers a dopamine release identical to what happens with gambling or substance use. Neuroscientist Dr. Anna Lemke calls this the pleasure-pain balance. And here's the disturbing part. The more you engage, the more your baseline shifts. What once felt exciting becomes merely adequate. You need more validation just to feel normal. Now imagine someone who recognizes this pattern early. Maybe they posted regularly for years, felt that rush, chased those numbers. And then one day, they noticed something unsettling. They couldn't experience anything beautiful without immediately thinking about how to frame it for an audience. A sunset wasn't just a sunset, it was content. A conversation wasn't just connection, it was a potential story. Their entire existence had become pre-processed for consumption. So they stopped. Not dramatically, not with a manifesto. They just quietly stepped back from the performance and started living again. And here's what researchers have found. People who take extended breaks from posting often describe it as remembering how to think. Because when you're constantly curating your life for public display, your internal monologue becomes an external one. You start narrating your own experience as if someone's always watching. You lose access to the raw, unedited version of yourself, the one that exists before you translate it into something shareable. The philosopher Heidegger had a term for this, das Man, the they-self. It's the version of you that conforms to social expectations, that does what one does, that lives according to anonymous public opinion rather than authentic choice. And social media has perfected das Man. It's created a global stage where everyone performs a version of themselves optimized for approval, while the actual self, the messy, contradictory, unpolished self, withers in the wings. People who don't post are often engaged in what I call identity archaeology. They're digging through layers of performance to find the person they were before they learned to commodify themselves. And that's not antisocial behavior. That's self-preservation. But let me ask you something. When was the last time you had a thought you didn't immediately evaluate for its shareability? For those who've stepped away from posting, this question is what woke them up. They realized they'd stopped having private thoughts. Everything was potential content. Their consciousness had become a content farm, and they were both the laborer and the product. There's a concept in psychology called self-objectification. When you begin viewing yourself as an object to be looked at and evaluated rather than as a subject who experiences life. Women, particularly, have been studied extensively on this. But social media has democratized self-objectification. Now everyone, regardless of gender, is encouraged to see themselves as a brand, an aesthetic, a carefully curated gallery. And the people who refuse to post, they've rejected that framework entirely. They've decided that their value isn't located in how they're perceived, but in how they experience. They've chosen to be subjects again, not objects. But this isn't easy, because we live in a culture that has increasingly conflated visibility with existence. Pics, or it didn't happen. If you didn't post it, were you even there? These aren't just jokes. They're symptoms of a deeper philosophical crisis. We've begun to believe that experience requires witnesses to be valid, that meaning needs an audience to be real. The existentialist philosophers would be horrified. Sartre believed that hell is other people precisely because their gaze can trap you in fixed identities. When you live for an audience, you become what they expect rather than what you are. You lose what he called radical freedom, the terrifying, exhilarating responsibility to define yourself. And people who don't post are exercising that freedom. They're saying, my life has meaning independent of your observation. My experiences are valid whether or not you witness them. I exist beyond your perception. That's not withdrawal. That's philosophical rebellion. Here's where it gets psychologically complex, though. Not everyone who abstains from posting is doing it from a place of enlightened self-awareness. Some are paralyzed by what psychologists call evaluation anxiety, the overwhelming fear that anything they share will be judged, misinterpreted, or ignored. For them, the empty profile isn't freedom. It's a fortress. They want to participate. They draft posts and delete them. They take photos and never share them. They hover over the post button and retreat at the last second. Why? Because social media has created an environment of permanent performance review. Everything you say is subject to immediate public evaluation. And for some people, that scrutiny is unbearable. These are often the same people who, in real life, are thoughtful, articulate, deeply engaged. But online, they freeze. Because the stakes feel impossibly high. One wrong word, one misinterpreted tone, and suddenly you're the main character for all the wrong reasons. You're screenshotted, quote tweeted, discussed by strangers who've decided who you are based on 280 characters. So they opt out, not because they have nothing to say, but because the cost of saying it feels too steep. And here's the tragedy. These are often the voices we need most. The careful thinkers, the nuanced observers, the people who won't reduce complex ideas to hot takes. But the very qualities that make their perspectives valuable, thoughtfulness, nuance, hesitation, are incompatible with the speed and simplicity that social media rewards. So we get a distorted public conversation, dominated by those most willing to speak with certainty, while the uncertain, the questioning, the genuinely curious remain silent in the margins. There's a paradox here that's worth sitting with. The people who are most absent online are often the most present in life. They're the ones who notice things, the way light changes throughout the day, the specific cadence of someone's laughter, the precise moment when a conversation shifts from small talk to truth. They're not distracted by notifications. They're not composing captions in their heads. They're just there, fully inhabiting the moment without needing to extract content from it. And in a world suffering from what philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls the burnout society, where we're all exhausted from the pressure to constantly produce, perform, and optimize, this kind of presence is revolutionary. Because what these digital ghosts understand, consciously or not, is that attention is finite. Every moment spent crafting your online persona is a moment not spent living your actual life. Every ounce of energy poured into managing your digital identity is energy unavailable for genuine relationship, creative work, or simple rest. They've done the math and decided the equation doesn't balance. But let's be honest about the cost. Because choosing not to post isn't neutral. In a world where social capital is increasingly measured in followers and engagement, opting out has consequences. You miss invitations because people forget you exist. You're not considered for opportunities because you have no online presence. Your relationships atrophy because everyone else is bonding over shared memes and stories you're not part of. The philosopher Albert Camus wrote about the absurd, the conflict between our human need for meaning and a universe that offers none. And maybe that's what we're witnessing here. The absurdity of being forced to perform your existence to prove it's valid, of needing strangers' approval to feel real, of having to transform every experience into content or risk having it forgotten. People who don't post are living in conscious absurdity. They know their silence makes them invisible in ways that matter. They feel the loneliness of being the only one not participating in the shared cultural ritual. But they've decided that the alternative, losing themselves to the performance, is a higher price than they're willing to pay. There's something the psychologist Carl Rogers understood about authenticity. He believed that the fully functioning person is one who experiences organismic trust, the ability to trust your own experience, your own perceptions, your own values, even when they conflict with external expectations. People who don't post often possess this in abundance. They trust their internal experience more than they trust the external validation that posting provides. They don't need 200 likes to confirm that something was meaningful. The meaning was inherent in the experience itself. But here's what complicates everything. Human beings are relational creatures. We need mirrors. We need others to reflect back to us who we are. And historically, that happened through real relationships, family, friends, community. But social media offered something intoxicating. Mirrors everywhere, constantly, on demand. Instant reflection from hundreds or thousands of people simultaneously. And once you've experienced that level of mirroring, going back to just a few real relationships can feel like sensory deprivation. The people who don't post often go through a kind of withdrawal. They miss the constant feedback loop. They feel invisible in a way that's genuinely painful. But over time, something shifts. The real relationships deepen. The conversations get more honest. The friendships that survive the absence of public performance become more nourishing precisely because they're not performed. And slowly, the need for constant mirroring fades. They learn to validate their own experiences, to trust their own perceptions, to know something was beautiful or meaningful or important without needing a crowd to confirm it. And maybe that's the real difference. People who post are seeking external confirmation of their internal experience. People who don't post are learning to trust the internal experience itself. ***, neither is inherently better. They're just different adaptations to the same bizarre reality we're all navigating. A world where our humanity is increasingly mediated through screens, where our identities are data, where our relationships are subject to algorithmic manipulation. Some people adapt by diving in, by learning to perform skillfully, by building communities and finding genuine connection within the constraints of the platform. And that's valid. That's real. But others adapt by pulling back, by protecting the parts of themselves that can't be translated into pixels, by insisting that some experiences remain unmediated. And that's valid too. The mistake is assuming one group has it figured out and the other is somehow failing. The truth is messy. We're all struggling with the same fundamental question. How do we remain human in a system designed to make us content? How do we preserve our authenticity when we're rewarded for performance? How do we maintain genuine connection when all our interactions are optimized for engagement? There's no easy answer. But the people who don't post are offering us something valuable. A reminder that visibility and value are not synonymous. That being seen by thousands means nothing if you've lost sight of yourself. That sometimes the most radical thing you can do is refuse to participate, to hold something back, to let your life remain partially unknowable. Because in an age of total transparency, mystery is rebellion. In a culture of constant broadcasting, silence is subversion. And in a world that demands you perform your existence to validate it, Simply living, quietly, privately, without an audience, becomes an act of profound resistance. The digital ghosts aren't hiding. They're haunting us with a question we're all afraid to answer. What would your life look like if you stopped performing it? Would it be enough? Would you be enough without the likes, without the validation, without the proof that you exist in other people's feeds? For those who've stopped posting, the answer is slowly becoming yes. Not because they've achieved some enlightened state, but because they've started remembering something the rest of us are forgetting: that you existed before social media, that you were whole before you learned to fragment yourself for consumption, that your worth was never actually dependent on your willingness to display it. And maybe that's what their silence is really saying. Not, "I'm too good for this," or "I'm hiding something," but simply, "I'm still here, fully, completely, in the only place that matters, my own life." And perhaps that's enough. Perhaps that's always been enough. We just forgot, for a while, in the noise and the performance and the endless, exhausting need to be seen. But the digital ghosts remember. And their empty profiles, their silent observation, their refusal to participate, it's not absence. It's presence, the most complete kind. The kind that doesn't need witnesses to be real.